He discovered an alien woman hiding in his home and was stunned when he learned her identity. Peter Collins returned to his apartment after a long shift at the construction site and immediately knew something was wrong because the air felt different and colder than usual as he stepped through the doorway, while his hand instinctively reached for the light switch, but hesitated when he heard a soft breathing sound coming from somewhere in the darkness of his living room. The apartment was small and simple, with just one bedroom, a cramped kitchen, and a living area that barely fit his old couch and television. But Peter liked it because the rent was cheap and the landlord never bothered him about anything, which suited his quiet lifestyle perfectly after years of moving from place to place. He flicked on the light and his heart nearly stopped when he saw her standing in the corner behind his bookshelf, with her body pressed against the wall as if trying to become invisible, and her eyes were wide with fear, but also something else that looked almost like curiosity, or maybe desperation. She was tall and slender with skin that had a faint silvery blue tint to it, like moonlight on water, and her hair was long and white, flowing down past her shoulders in waves that seemed to move on their own, even though there was no breeze in the room, while her face was human-like, but with features that were just slightly too perfect and symmetrical to be completely normal. Peter froze in place and stared at her for what felt like an eternity, before his brain finally caught up with what his eyes were seeing, and he realized this was not a human woman standing in his apartment, but something else entirely, and his first thought was that he must be hallucinating from exhaustion, or maybe someone had slipped something into his coffee at work. The woman raised her hands slowly in a gesture that looked like surrender, and she spoke in a voice that was soft and musical, but with an accent he could not place anywhere on earth, as she said, "Please do not be afraid and do not call anyone, because you no harm and I only need a place to hide for a short time." Peter blinked and shook his head, trying to clear his thoughts, while his mouth opened and closed several times before he finally managed to say, "What are you, and how did you get into my apartment, because I know I locked the door this morning when I left." She took a small step forward but stopped when she saw him tense up, and she said, "My name is Luna, and I am not from this world but from a place very far away. And I came here because my people were attacked, and I had to escape before they found me and killed me like they killed so many others." Her words hung in the air between them, and Peter felt his heart pounding in his chest as he tried to process what she was saying, because this was impossible, and things like this did not happen to ordinary people like him who just wanted to work their job and pay their bills and live a quiet life. He took a deep breath and forced himself to think rationally as he said, "Okay, let's say I believe you, which I am not sure I do yet. But why did you choose my apartment to hide in, out of all the places in this city?" Luna looked down at her hands and said, "I did not choose specifically, but I was injured when I crashed and I could barely walk. And your building was the closest one I could reach, and your door was the easiest to open without making noise, because the lock was old and simple." Peter glanced at the door and realized she was right, because he had been meaning to get the landlord to replace that lock for months now, but had never bothered to follow up on it, and now here he was with an alien woman in his apartment because of his own laziness. He studied her more carefully and noticed for the first time that she was wearing strange clothing that looked like it was made from some kind of metallic fabric that shimmered when she moved, and there were dark stains on her side that might have been blood, although the color was slightly different from human blood, being more purple than red. "Are you hurt?" he asked, despite his better judgment telling him to call the police or run away or do anything other than stand here talking to her like this was a normal situation. Luna nodded slowly and touched her side with one hand as she said, "Yes, but it is not serious, and my body will heal itself given time, because my people have advanced biology that repairs damage much faster than humans." Doctor felt a strange mix of fear and fascination as he listened to her speak, because part of him still did not believe any of this was real, but another part of him recognized that everything about her, from her appearance to her voice to the way she moved, was too detailed and consistent to be a hallucination or a trick. He made a decision that he knew might be incredibly stupid, but something in her eyes made him want to help her as he said, "All right, you can stay here for tonight, but tomorrow we need to figure out what to do about this situation, because I cannot just hide an alien in my apartment forever." Luna smiled for the first time, and her whole face seemed to light up with genuine relief and gratitude as she said, "Thank you, and I promise I will not cause you any trouble, and I will leave as soon as it is safe for me to do." Sopater gestured toward the couch and said, "You can sit down if you want, and I will get you some water and maybe something to eat if you can eat human food." She moved across the room with a grace that was almost unsettling, because her movements were too smooth and flowing, as if gravity affected her differently than it did normal people, and she settled onto the couch carefully as if afraid it might break under her weight, even though she looked like she weighed almost nothing. He went into the kitchen and filled a glass with water while his mind raced with questions about who she was and where she came from and why anyone would be trying to kill her, and what he was going to do if someone came looking for her at his apartment. When he returned to the living room, she took the glass from him and drank the water in one long gulp, and he could see the relief on her face as she said, "Thank you, because I have not had water in almost 2 days since my ship crashed." Peter sat down in the chair across from her and said, "You mentioned a ship, so there is a crashed spaceship somewhere around here that people are going to find?" Eventually, Luna shook her head and said no, because the ship destroyed itself after I escaped, so there would be no evidence left behind for anyone to find and study, which is standard protocol for my people when we face capture or death. He leaned back in his chair and ran his hands through his hair as he tried to wrap his mind around everything she was telling him, because this was beyond anything he had ever imagined might happen in his boring, ordinary life. "Tell me more about who is chasing you and why they want to kill you," he said, "because if I am going to help you, I need to know what I am getting myself into here." Luna looked at him with those strange, beautiful eyes and said, "My people are called the Kalari, and we have been traveling through space for thousands of years searching for new worlds and knowledge. But we are not the only species doing this, and there are others who see us as a threat or as competition for resources." She paused and seemed to be choosing her words carefully as she continued. "There is another species called the Vorthen, who have been hunting my people for generations, because they believe we possess something valuable that they want, and they will stop at nothing to get it, even if it means destroying entire worlds." Peter felt a chill run down his spine as he asked, "What is it that they want from you?" Luna hesitated and then said, "Knowledge, because my people have learned things about the universe that others have not discovered yet, and this knowledge gives us power, and the Vorthen want that power for themselves." He studied her face and could see the truth in her eyes, even though everything she was saying sounded like something out of a science fiction movie, and he said, "So you are on the run from these Vorthen, and you crashed here on Earth by accident?" She nodded and said, "Yes, and I do not know if they followed me here or not, but I cannot risk revealing myself to your authorities, because if the Vorthen learn that I am here, they will come, and they will not care about collateral damage to your world." Peter felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders as he realized that helping her might put not just himself but potentially the entire planet at risk, and yet he could not bring himself to turn her away, because she was clearly desperate and afraid. He made another decision that he hoped he would not regret as he said, "Okay, you can stay here for a few days while you recover and figure out your next move, but you need to stay hidden and not let anyone see you." Luna smiled again and said, "Thank you, Peter, and I will do everything I can to repay your kindness someday." He waved his hand dismissively and said, "Don't worry about it, but we need to establish some ground rules, because this is going to be complicated enough without misunderstandings." They spent the next hour talking about practical matters like where she would sleep and what she could eat and how she would stay out of sight if anyone came to visit him, which was unlikely, since he did not have many friends, but still possible. Eventually, Peter showed her to his bedroom and said, "You can sleep here tonight and I will take the couch, because you need rest to heal your injury." Luna protested at first, but he insisted and she finally agreed, and as he closed the door behind him, he stood in the hallway for a moment wondering what he had just gotten himself into, and whether he had made a terrible mistake. Over the next few days, Peter fell into a strange routine where he would go to work in the morning and try to act normal while his mind kept wandering back to the alien woman hiding in his apartment, and wondering what she was doing while he was gone. Luna spent most of her time resting and healing, and Peter was amazed at how quickly her injury closed up and disappeared, leaving no trace that it had ever been there in the first place, which made him realize that she had been telling the truth about her people's advanced biology. In the evenings they would talk, and Peter learned more about her world and her people in the vast universe beyond Earth that he had never really thought much about before, because he had always been too focused on just getting through each day. She told him about the Kalari homeworld, which was A beautiful place with purple skies and 3 moons where the cities were built into the sides of massive crystal mountains that glowed with their own inner light, and where her people lived in harmony with nature, using technology that did not harm the environment. Peter listened with fascination as she described traveling between stars in ships that could bend space itself, and visiting worlds so different from Earth that they seemed impossible, and meeting other species both friendly and hostile in turn. He told her about his own life, which seemed boring and mundane by comparison. But she listened with genuine interest and asked questions about human culture and history, and the way people lived on Earth. One evening about a week after she had arrived, Peter came home to find Luna standing by the window looking out at the city, with an expression of sadness on her face, and he asked, "What is wrong?" She turned to him and said, "I have been monitoring communications from space, using technology built into my body, and I have detected Vorthan ships entering your solar system, which means they followed me here and they are searching for me." Peter felt his blood run cold as he asked, "How long do we have before they find you?" Luna shook her head and said, "I do not know, because they are being careful and methodical in their search, but it could be days or weeks before they narrow down my location, and when they do, they will come for me." He sat down heavily on the couch and said, "What happens if they find you here?" She looked at him with those sad, beautiful eyes and said, "They will kill me, and probably you as well, because you have helped me, and they will want to eliminate any witnesses, and depending on how desperate they are, they might destroy this entire area to make sure I am dead." Peter felt anger rising in his chest as he said, "So, what are we supposed to do? Just sit here and wait for them to show up and kill us both?" Luna moved away from the window and sat down beside him as she said, "No, because I have a plan, but it is dangerous and I will need your help to make it work." He looked at her and said, "Tell me what you need." She explained that there was a Kalari outpost hidden in the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter, where a small group of her people maintained a secret base for emergency situations like this, and if she could get there, they would help her escape the solar system and lead the Vorthan away from Earth. Peter asked, "How are you supposed to get there?" Without a ship, Luna smiled slightly and said, "That is where you come in, because I need you to help me contact someone who can provide transportation." Over the next few days, Peter found himself doing things he never imagined he would do, as he used his computer to search for people who claimed to have seen UFOs or had contact with aliens, which led him down a rabbit hole of conspiracy websites and forums filled with wild theories and obvious frauds. But Luna was able to guide him toward the real contacts, and eventually they found a woman named Claire, who ran a small aerospace company and claimed to have reverse-engineered alien technology from a crash site years ago. Peter was skeptical, but Luna assured him that Claire was legitimate and that she would help them if they could convince her of the situation. So he arranged a meeting at a diner outside the city where they could talk privately. Claire turned out to be a tough-looking woman in her 50s with gray hair and sharp eyes that seemed to see right through any lies, and when Peter tried to explain the situation, she listened without interrupting, and then said, "Prove it." Luna had been waiting in Peter's car, and he went out to get her, knowing this was a risk but having no other choice, and when she walked into the diner, Claire stood up so fast she nearly knocked over her coffee. The 3 of them talked for over an hour with Luna, answering Claire's questions about technology and physics and showing her things that no human could fake, like the way her eyes could change color or how she could make her skin glow faintly in the dark. Finally, Claire sat back and said, "All right, I believe you and I will help you, but this is going to cost me everything if it goes wrong, so you better be worth it." Luna looked at her with gratitude and said, "I promise you will not regret this, and my people will reward you for your help when this is over." Claire laughed bitterly and said, "If we survive this ill, just be happy to see tomorrow." They made plans for Claire to use one of her experimental spacecraft to take Luna to the asteroid belt, and Peter insisted on coming along, despite both women trying to convince him to stay behind, because he said, "I have come this far and I'm not backing out now." The launch was set for 3 days later at a private facility that Claire owned in the desert, and Peter spent those days helping Luna prepare while also trying to come to terms with the fact that he was about to leave Earth for the first time in his life on the night before they were supposed to leave Peter. And Luna sat on his apartment balcony looking up at the stars, and she said, "You do not have to do this because you have already done so much for me, and I do not want you to risk your life." He looked at her and realized that somewhere over the past few weeks he had stopped seeing her as an alien and started seeing her as just Luna, a person who needed help and who had become important, to him in a way he could not quite explain. "I want to do this," he said, simply because it feels like the right thing. "And maybe because my life was pretty empty before you showed up. And this gives me something to care about." Luna reached over and took his hand in hers, and her touch was warm despite her strange appearance, and she said, "Thank you for everything, Peter. Because you have shown me that humans are capable of great kindness and courage." The next morning, they drove out to the desert facility, where Claire was waiting with her spacecraft, which looked like a sleek silver needle standing upright on a launch pad, and Peter felt his stomach twist with nervousness as he looked at it. They climbed aboard and strapped into seats that Claire had modified for the flight, and as the engines powered up, Peter wondered if this was the last mistake he would ever make. The launch was smoother than he expected, and within minutes, they had broken free of Earth's atmosphere and were accelerating toward the asteroid belt, while Claire handled the controls with the confidence of someone who had done this before. Luna sat beside Peter and monitored the space around them for any sign of Vorthan ships, while Claire plotted their course to avoid detection. They were 3 hours into the flight when Luna suddenly tensed and said, "We have a problem because there is a Vorthan scout ship approaching from behind, and it has locked onto our signal." Claire cursed and pushed the engines harder as she said, "How long do we have?" Luna checked her readings and said, "Less than 10 minutes before they are in weapons range." Peter felt his heart pounding as he asked, "What can we do?" Claire looked back at them and said, "Hold on, because this is going to get rough," and then she threw the ship into a series of evasive maneuvers that sent them spinning through space at speeds that made Peter's stomach lurch. The Vorthan ship fired on them, and energy blasts streaked past their hull close enough that Peter could see them through the viewports as brilliant flashes of purple light. Claire managed to dodge most of the attacks, but one blast clipped their rear engine, causing alarms to blare throughout the cabin as she fought to keep control of the ship. Luna unbuckled herself and moved to the back of the cabin, where she opened a panel and began working on the damaged systems with her bare hands. And Peter watched in amazement as sparks flew around her, but she did not seem to notice or care. Claire shouted that they were not going to make it to the asteroid belt at this rate, and that they needed to find somewhere to hide or make a stand. Luna called back that there was an abandoned mining station nearby that might provide cover, and Claire changed course immediately, heading for the coordinates Luna provided. They reached the station just ahead of the Vorthan ship, and Claire brought them in for a hard landing that scraped their hull against the docking bay doors, but got them inside before the next volley of weapons fire could hit them. The three of them scrambled out of the damaged ship, and Luna led them deeper into the station, which was dark and cold since it had been abandoned for years. Peter asked what the plan was now, and Luna said, "We need to get to the station's communication array, so I can send a distress signal to my people and hope they can get here before the Vorthan breach the station." They made their way through the corridors using flashlights to see, because the station's power had been offline for a long time, and Peter could hear strange echoes and creaks from the structure around them. Claire found the communication room and began trying to restore power, while Luna worked on the equipment itself, using her knowledge of technology that far exceeded anything humans had created. Peter stood guard at the door with a tool he had grabbed from the ship that Claire said could be used as a weapon if necessary, though he hoped it would not come to that. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, Luna got the communication array working and sent her distress signal out into space with a message in her people's language that Peter could not understand. She turned to him and Claire and said, "Now we wait and hope my people receive the signal before the Vorthan find us." They did not have to wait long, because within minutes they heard the sound of metal being torn apart somewhere in the station, and they knew the Vorthan had breached the hull and were coming for them. Claire grabbed her weapon and said, "We need to barricade this room," and Luna used her strength to help drag heavy equipment in front of the door, while Peter tried not to think about how this might be the last thing he ever did. The sounds got closer and closer until they could hear footsteps in the corridor outside, and then something began pounding on the door with tremendous force that shook the entire room. Luna positioned herself between Peter and the door and said, "If they get through, I will hold them off as long as I can, and you both need to run and try to find another way out." Peter shook his head and said, "We are not leaving you." She looked at him with those beautiful alien eyes and said, "Please, Peter, because you have given me hope that there is goodness in this universe, and I do not want you to die here." Before he could respond, the door exploded inward and a massive creature came through the opening, and Peter realized this was his first look at a Vorthan, and it was terrifying. The creature was over 7 feet tall with armor that looked like it was made from black metal, and its face was hidden behind a helmet. But Peter could see glowing red eyes staring at them. Through the visor, Luna stepped forward and shouted something in a language Peter did not know, and the Vorthan responded in kind. And then they began fighting with a speed and ferocity that was almost impossible to follow. Peter and Claire fired their weapons at the Vorthan, but their attacks seemed to have little effect on its armor, while Luna used her bare hands and incredible strength to match it. Blow for blow, more Vorthan soldiers poured into the room, and Peter realized they were going to be overwhelmed when suddenly there was a brilliant flash of light from outside the station, and the Vorthan Frozia voice came over the station's communication system, speaking in English and saying, "This is the Kalari ship Starlight to any Kalari survivors in the station. Please respond," Luna cried out in her own language, and the voice responded with obvious relief and said, "Hold your position because we are sending a boarding party." The Vorthan seemed to realize they were about to be outnumbered, and they began retreating back through the station while Luna collapsed against the wall, breathing hard from the fight. Within minutes, Kalari soldiers arrived in the communication room, and they immediately surrounded Luna with concern and respect, calling her by a title that Peter did not understand. But that clearly meant she was important. One of the soldiers looked at Peter and Claire and said, "You have our eternal gratitude for protecting her because she is far more valuable than you." No, Peter looked at Luna in confusion and said, "What is he talking about?" Luna stood up slowly and said, "I am sorry I did not tell you the whole truth about who I am because I was afraid you would not help me if you knew." She paused and then said, "My name is Luna, but I am also the daughter of the Kalari High Council leader, and the Vorthan want me because they believe that by capturing me, they can force my people to give them our knowledge." Peter felt like the ground had dropped out from under him as he realized he had been harboring not just any refugee, but basically alien royalty. And no wonder the Vorthan had been so determined to find her. Luna walked over to him and said, "I am sorry for not being honest with you, but I needed someone who would help me because I was Luna, and not because of who my family is." Looked at her, and despite everything, he found himself smiling as he said, "Well, it would have been nice to know, but I guess it does not change anything because you still needed help. And I was still willing to give it." She hugged him suddenly, and he felt the warmth of her gratitude and affection, and realized that despite all the danger and chaos of the past few weeks, he did not regret any of it. The Kalari evacuated them from the mining station and brought them aboard the Starlight, which was a massive ship that made Claire's spacecraft look like a toy by comparison. Luna was taken away to be debriefed by her people, while Peter and Claire were given quarters and told they would be returned to Earth soon, but that the Kalari wanted to thank them properly first. Several hours later, Luna came to find Peter in his quarters, and she said, "I have spoken with my father, and he has agreed to establish formal contact with your world because of what you did, and because you proved that humans are ready to join the galactic community." Peter sat down heavily as he tried to process what she was saying and said, "So this is going to change everything for Earth?" Luna nodded and said, "Yes, but it will be a slow process because your people need time to adjust to the reality that they are not alone in the universe." She sat down beside him and said, "I want you to know that you will always have a place with my people if you choose to leave Earth, because you have earned that right through your courage and kindness." Peter thought about it for a long moment and then said, "I appreciate that, but I think I need to go home at least for now, because I have a life there, and people who will wonder where I went, even if that life seems boring compared to all this." Luna smiled and said, "I understand, and maybe that is what makes you special, because you helped me not for adventure or reward, but simply because it was the right thing to do." They talked for a while longer, and Luna told him about the plans for first contact and how Earth would soon have representatives meeting with the Kalari Council, and how humanity would be offered technology and knowledge that would change everything. Eventually, it was time for Peter and Claire to return to Earth, and as he stood in the docking bay preparing to board the shuttle that would take them home, Luna came to say goodbye. She handed him a small device and said, "This is a communicator that will let you contact me anytime you want, no matter where in the universe I am, and I hope you will use it because I would like to stay in touch." Peter took the device and said, I will, and thank you for everything because you turned my boring life into something amazing, even if it was just for a little," while Luna kissed him on the cheek and said, "No, Peter, thank you because you saved my life and you showed me that there is still hope and goodness in the universe." The shuttle took them back to Earth, and Peter returned to his apartment, which felt strange and empty after everything that had happened, and he wondered if he would ever be able to go back to his normal life. But over the next few months, as the Kalari made contact with Earth and the world learned that humans were not alone, Peter found himself becoming an important figure in the new relationship between the two species. Because he was one of the first humans to meet an alien and help them, he worked with Claire, who used her knowledge and the technology the Kalari shared, to start building spacecraft that could take humans to the stars. And Peter often found himself thinking about Luna and wondering what she was doing out there in the vast universe. One day, about a year after they had said goodbye, Peter was sitting on his balcony when he felt the communicator vibrate in his pocket, and he pulled it out to see Luna's face on the screen. She smiled and said, "Hello, Peter, and I wanted to let you know that I am coming back to Earth because my father is sending me as an ambassador, and I will be living there permanently to help guide the relationship between our people." Peter felt his heart leap as he said, "That is great news, and maybe we can pick up where we left off." Luna laughed and said, "I would like that, very much, because you are still the most interesting human I have ever met." As Peter ended the call and looked up at the stars, he realized that his life had changed in ways he never could have imagined, and all because he had chosen to help a stranger in need, and he smiled, knowing that this was just the beginning of an amazing new chapter.